My name is Catherine Wilson, and I have a nonprofit here on Sebago Lake in Standish, Maine, called Stop Trafficking US. And what I've been doing for about 6 years now is really educating our community, along with just privileged to be alongside our Homeland Security, our district attorney, who's very proactive in this area, and other faith-based leaders here, and sex therapists, etc. And we educate our community about what is sex trafficking, and then the genesis of it, of course, and so many other things, incarceration, addictions, and so much more, is the child abuse, and being able to really be a force for prevention around child sexual abuse. That has been my passion, and we've been able to make a pretty good impact here locally. Our highlight was last fall when we brought Victor in, and his team, Pete Singer was with him, and we did a 3-day faith-based child abuse prevention conference. And it was just amazing. We offered CEUs, we raised the money in advance so that all the participants could come free of charge. And all the participants had the same resounding theme. This was the best, most educational conference they had ever been to. And I had the opportunity to talk to Victor privately in between sessions. And I said, okay, what is the one thing we can do here that would make the most significant impact? How can we be of service in this area? And he said the faith-based organizations, just going in and trying to get them to be educated and learn about prevention, and putting in policies and procedures in place that would keep the children and vulnerable adults safe within that organization. So that is our 2020 goal, was to take the largest county in the state of Maine, which is Cumberland County. And our intention is to get every faith-based organization within that county to do just that. And volunteers from Rotary have been gathering all that data information, contact data for those organizations. And then the Rotary leader started talking and said, hey, why are we doing just Cumberland County? Let's enlist all the Rotaries across the state of Maine and get all of the faith-based organization information throughout Maine. And so the intention for this video, that I'm so deeply grateful to the three of you for being willing to participate, is to really use this as an educational piece for all of those faith-based organizations across the state. So that's who I am and our intention with this video. Would you guys just take a couple of minutes and just say who you are and briefly what you do, and then let's jump into the questions?
I'm Victor Veith. I'm Director of Education and Research for the Zero Abuse Project. We're a 501c3 nonprofit in St. Paul, Minnesota. We also have offices in Alexandria, Virginia. My background is in child protection. I was a prosecutor in Minnesota for a decade. I then went to our nation's capital. I served as director of the National Center for Prosecution of Child Abuse, and then have worked for a number of national organizations since then. Our current program, we train about 30,000 professionals a year. We consult on a large number of cases, and specifically with respect to the faith community, we have a number of outreach initiatives to get the faith leaders more engaged in issues of child protection.
Thank you. Shira?
My name is Shira Bergovitz, and I am the president and CEO of Sacred Spaces. Sacred Spaces works with Jewish institutions to help them prevent and respond to abuse within the institution should it occur. We do this through policies and training, and working to form safety committees in each organization, ensuring that the institutions themselves have the capacity and the training to oversee these initiatives for the long term. We work really hard to make sure that these initiatives are proactive rather than reactive, and that they are framed as moral Jewish imperatives, that this is what it means to have a healthy organization. My background is that I am an attorney specialized in criminal and family law, and a psychologist specialized in creating large-scale organizational change. And I've worked over the last decade studying the ways in which psychology and law intersect in sexual offending in the faith community, and in particular got my start interning with Victor Veith at the center. So it's an honor to be here with him and with Boz, who we've worked closely together in thinking through how do the issues that pertain to the Jewish community and the Christian community and the Muslim community and really every faith community, how are they the same and how are they different? And so it's a privilege to be here today with both of you and also with you, Catherine, as well. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Boz?
Thank you, Catherine. Good to be here. And yeah, like Shira just said, it's always good to be with Shira and Victor. I don't get to see them that often. So if I can come and join this conversation and talk to them and see them as well, then it's a double benefit for me. So I'm glad to be here. My name is Boz Chividjian. I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called GRACE, which stands for Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment. We are in many ways sort of the Christian version of Sacred Spaces. We focus really in two primary areas. We focus on education and investigations. Education is going into Christian churches and various Christian organizations and engaging them with our safeguarding initiative, which really in sum trains and equips every demographic within that community on issues related to the child safeguarding and also the safeguarding of vulnerable people. Our hope and prayer is that through the work we do, we will help transform the culture and the very DNA of those particular communities to become the greatest advocates for kids and vulnerable people. And then the other part of the organization does independent investigation. Sadly, in so many faith communities, abuse issues surface. Churches and organizations don't know, quite frankly, how to respond to them well, and even beginning to address that. And so we will be hired to come in and do a independent investigation to bring out the truth and help survivors and their voices be heard, and as well helping churches understand where they failed and where they need to demonstrate genuine repentance. I'm a lawyer. I'm a former prosecutor, child abuse prosecutor, and also a law professor. Good to be here.
Wow. Thank you so much, the three of you, for who you are, how you've shown up in this world. It's a privilege to have you on this call. I know how busy the three of you are, and just thank you. I'm Catherine Ann Wilson. I am the Executive Director of Stop Trafficking US, a 501c3 nonprofit here in our beautiful state of Maine on Sebago Lake. And our goal is prevention through education. So thank you so much. We're going to jump right in. So the first question is going to go out to Victor. Victor, what are the risk factors for children being physically abused or neglected during this pandemic that we're in? And what about domestic violence?
There are at least three risk factors. First of all, most people who commit physical abuse or neglect are the parents or other caregivers. According to the National Incidence Study, which is a collection of data by the United States Department of Health and Human Services, they say 100% of those who commit acts of neglect, withholding food, clothing, shelter, medical care, are parents or other caregivers in the home. And with respect to physical abuse or emotional abuse, more than 90% of the time, the perpetrators are parents or significant others of parents. So the primary perpetrators are parents, and now because of the pandemic and quarantine, children who are being abused are isolated with those offenders. The second risk factor is just that there are additional stressors under the pandemic. Parents are losing their job, or they're being furloughed, their wages are going down. They may not have traditional outlets to control their emotions or address their anxiety. They're not going to the gym, they're not watching sports, they can't get out and go to the movies or dinner. And so there's added stressors. Plus now they may have to homeschool, and they're in this close confined setting with children. That may add to the risk of abuse. And then the third factor is children, at least those who are of school age, they're not out and about every day. They're not accessing teachers or faith leaders or doctors or other mandated reporters. So they have no outlet, nobody to reach out to, or nobody out there who might pick up on a sign of abuse. So those three factors coming together probably are increasing the risk of physical abuse and neglect. And those factors also play a huge role in domestic violence as well. So if you're being beaten by, say, your husband, you're not getting out and going to work, so nobody's going to pick up on an injury. You've got nobody to reach out to. The offender has you in a much more isolated, confined setting. And it's harder to develop safety plans. Maybe your safety plan was you were going to go to your best friend's house if you wanted to run away. Well, now maybe you can't go to your best friend's house because of the quarantine and she lives in another state. So those and other factors are also playing a likely role in the increase of domestic violence.
Thank you for that. I'm going to follow that up with a second question for you, Victor. What are the signs that a physical abuse that a faith leader should be aware of? So if the faith leader is interacting with a family, could physical abuse also be sexual abuse, and how are they seeing that?
Well, potential signs of physical abuse. So let's say you're a clergy person and you're having a Bible study with children or a catechism class or whatever it may be, and you've got several children there via Zoom. You may see, just as you folks are seeing on the Zoom, at least part of the body of the child. So I'd look at issues on the head. So could there be a handprint? You slap a child really hard, literally the fingers can be imprinted, or you get 2 or 3 linear lines that may be indicative of a blow to the child's face. Sometimes offenders will pull a child's hairs or drag him across the room, so a pocket of missing hair without any other explanation could be concerning. A black eye obviously could be concerning, although there are other things that might cause a black eye as well. May not be visible, although maybe if a child turns their head. A little pockmark, a little blood inside the ear and behind the ear. Parents pull a child's ear, and so they grab it with the fingers, and that may cause an injury inside and behind an ear. And then whip marks might be harder to see on a Zoom, but let's say a child leans forward and puts their, hands to their head, you might see their forearms perhaps. And oftentimes when children are whipped with a belt or a stick or another object, they curl up in a ball. And so they're protecting their tiny frame as they're being beaten. And so the whip marks, often the blows are inflicted on the forearms or the side of the legs. So if for any reason they held up their forearms and you saw something like that, that would be suspicious. There is a free app that anyone can download on their phone. It's called literally Child Protector app. It was developed by the Children's Hospital at Mercy Children's Hospital in Kansas City by some medical professionals I respect. It was really designed for first responders or other folks that may intersect with a child at a minimal level. But there's a lot in there that a layperson could use if you're wondering, gosh, is that not suspicious of abuse? Keep in mind, though, you're not an investigator. If you have a reasonable suspicion of abuse, your job is not to investigate, not to follow up with questions, but to report to the authorities. So if you use a tool like the Child Protector app, you're not an investigator, you're just using a tool to remind yourself of what is or is not suspicious of physical abuse. And your last question about the correlation of physical abuse and sexual abuse, there's a body of research called polyvictimization, finding that 2/3 of abused children are violated in at least 2 ways and about 1/3 in 5 or more ways. So absolutely, when you do see signs of physical abuse or emotional abuse or neglect or domestic violence, you have to think of the possibility that there could be other forms of abuse, such as sexual abuse, arising as well.
Thank you so much. I'll make sure that information about the app goes out as well so people can find that easily. Shira, I'm going to give you that next question if you don't mind. What are the risk factors of sexual abuse and being trafficked?
So one of the things that is happening now, especially during this pandemic, is that we are seeing children, especially younger and younger children, as young as 3 or 4 years old, spending more time online. And so this is always a risk, especially for teens and older youth, and now it's a risk for everyone. So what we're seeing is that there are a number of ways in which a child might encounter an experience that is upsetting or abusive. So one is at a very basic level, which is that there are things that pop up on a child's computer that they shouldn't be seeing, that they're not prepared to see, and they are being exposed to sexually explicit, sometimes violent, very disturbing content. It can pop up at the bottom of an otherwise very safe site, and certainly it's popping up on YouTube. And so what we're seeing on YouTube is that it's happening in that when the video ends, another video will start to play, and the video might be a troubling video. Other things we're seeing is that we're seeing online predators taking otherwise holistic videos and inserting very disturbing images to the videos. So a parent may have already viewed that video and knows that that episode or that show is okay and safe, but it's the same video that has now been altered. And so it's really a reason why children need to have supervision, and they shouldn't be given a laptop to sit down with YouTube to just start watching videos. The other thing that we can do when you send out your email is provide a link where people can put their YouTube link into this app, and it will take it out of the YouTube site so that it does not allow videos to play automatically. So that's just one example of ways in which children are being exposed to material that they never would have been exposed to before.
Is that true for the YouTube for kids? You know, I know that there's the two YouTubes. There's the regular YouTube, and then there's YouTube for kids. Is that happening on the YouTube for kids as well?
Well, my understanding is that it still plays another video afterwards. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so that's how they're doing it. Wow. Okay.
Whenever there's another video playing, it's not necessarily the video that you approved. And
Right.
so you need to be able to be there before that happens. And one of the ways to, parents might think, oh, I know this is 20 minutes, I'm going to come in the last 2 minutes, but then something happens, they get distracted. And so one way to just avoid it is to use this separate app. But really anything on YouTube can be uploaded by other people. And so even the video that you thought was safe, unless you've just viewed it, it might be an episode you're familiar with and still have a problem. Other ways in which, so that's in terms of being exposed to sexually explicit material or otherwise violent or graphic material. And YouTube is just one example. What we also know is that because children are spending more time online, and children are more adept at navigating social media than their parents or their teachers,
Sure.
right? For every app or social media platform that we learn, they are one step ahead of us learning something new. And by the time we've learned it, it's outdated and they're onto something else, right? And predators are very adept at navigating these same platforms. And so there are a couple of things that could happen. One is the idea that a child is online and they have questions. They have questions about their bodies. They have questions about sex, and they start asking them, or they start searching on Google, and they come into contact with people who are more than happy to answer those questions for them. And even if it's much more benign, it can happen on Facebook, right? So there's a community member who's having an interesting conversation, and a child gets involved in that conversation and starts commenting. Well, now it's very easy for that person to private message that child and say, I wanted to follow up on what you were saying. And so the relationship starts. And at a time when parents are overwhelmed and stressed and schools are out and children have a lot more time on their hand, this is the perfect opportunity that predators have in many cases been waiting for, and they can take advantage. And it's important to remember that a predator is not necessarily that stranger out there that they meet in a chat room. It can be, but what we know from the research is that online mirrors in many ways what happens in real life, and that it's people that we know, people that we trust in real life, who will then take advantage of online communications. And so whether it's a Zoom call, whether it's a text message, whether it's a social media chat function, we need to be following the same best practice policies we would at any time. And we need to be doing it right now.
Agreed. And, you know, for me as a grandmother, from 2 to 15-year-old, I've got 5 grandchildren. There are so many websites out there about how to protect your kids. It's hard to know. And sometimes they say different things. Is there like, can we add to this? maybe just the top 3 or something, where I know that NetSmarts is really good, and that's typically where I send people. Darkness to Light, I'll send them there. What are your top 3, hey parents, this is where you need to go to understand how to protect your kids?
Those were 2 really good options. The Jacob Wetterling Resource Center also has fantastic options. In partnership with Shield of West Virginia, they've just created a series of videos that are targeted towards the different ages. So videos for younger children, videos for high schoolers, in a very relatable manner. Allison Fay, one of Victor's colleagues, delivers a number of these videos, and they're short, they're brief, and they're very relatable. There's a study published very recently by David Finkelhor and his colleagues about best practices among what are the techniques, the interventions that have been most effective in protecting children online. And one of the conclusions that the study makes is that the best intervention is not, here's an online training, go watch it, but that this has to be integrated into whatever typical educational communication is happening. So if your school is having classes, it has to be a conversation that you're having in the classes. If you're a parent who's interacting with your children, this needs to be something that you talk about. And so the research did not support this idea that scaring children and telling them about all the very scary things that can happen online and reprimanding them would make them safer, but rather the same thing that we're finding in real life, which is making sure children know how to get help, when to get help, and who they can go to. We just had a case that came across our desk this week where a child, a teenager, had been sexually exploited online. It was a sextortion case, which is particularly scary because there's a major threat that's being held over a very young and anxious, vulnerable child. And she turned to a counselor at camp and whom she had maintained a relationship with. And she was able to say, like, this happened to me, I don't know what to do about it. And the counselor had enough training to know who to go to next. And the director had enough training to know to report it. That's what we want to see happening. So rather than hearing all of this and thinking that the adults are the predators, some adults are predators. The vast majority of adults are there to protect children. And what we want to do is make sure that those relationships are intact now more than ever, so that adults can help protect them. Children know where to go. They can continue these conversations. And one of the things we emphasize in that case is that the parents should not be upset at the child. She should not lose her privileges online, but rather this should be normalized. What happened to you is something that happens. It's not your fault. We're going to help figure this out together. This is bigger than just you, and we're here to help you.
So in the home environment then, instead of having it one isolated training like stop, drop, and roll if you're on fire, it's more a conversation of the values of that family. It's something that we talk about. We talk about it at home. We talk about it at school. We normalize it without the shame and fear tactics as part of it.
Precisely. So they might watch the video together, then talk about it, and then adapt some family policies. So maybe the computer is being used in a living space that everybody can see. Maybe there are parental controls being set. So it's not that it's to the exclusion of these technological security measures or protocols, but that it's all together. You need all of these approaches at once.
I love that, which brings me to the next question about ideal child protection policies. So in this pandemic, our whole world's been turned upside down, you know, like Victor was talking about earlier. I mean, if children are abused by people that they know and trust most of the time, who are they quarantined with, you know? So the question is, what are ideal child protection policies, and how should they be changed during this time of pandemic?
Is that question to me?
Or? It is.
So it's in many ways like what we were just talking about before. It's the very same principles that you would apply in real life. It's understanding that the principle remains intact and figuring out how do you apply this principle to a new concept. new context. And so, for example, one of the main gold standards, best practices that you would apply in real life is the concept of too deep leadership. And so the idea of too deep leadership is that a child is not alone, secluded behind a closed door with an adult, and that there are two adults in the room at all times. When that is not possible, the interactions are observable and interruptible. And so in a classroom, in a building, a camp, the way this might be achieved is you might have a window in a classroom door if you can't have two people present, and then it would be situated in a place of a part of the building that lots of people pass by, schedule a meeting scheduled during hours where lots of people are there, not after hours. So how do we take those same things, that same idea, and start applying it online? And here are some ways that you can do that. So for online communications, it's the same thing. If you're having a meeting, a Zoom meeting, you would have too deep leadership on that Zoom call. Instead of just having one adult, have multiple adults. It means that whenever there's a social media or online communication going out to a child, another adult is copied on it. So that might be the administrator from the organization, or it's copying a parent. And in some cases, people will say, well, we want this to be private. We want the child to feel like they can come to us. What if they're stuck at home with an abusive parent? We don't want to be copying the parent. And that's why I present both of these options, that it might be a parent or it might be the administrator that you're copying. And so that doesn't mean that the entire conversation needs to be copied. What it does mean is that scheduling is known. None of this is happening at random intervals whenever people want, but rather if there's going to be a communication with a child, it goes on the organization's calendar, and that calendar link so that it is shared with others in the organization. And so that if somebody wanted to drop in unexpected, they could, and everybody knows that. And similarly, if there's programming going on for a youth serving organization, an after school, a Boys and Girls Club, a Boy Scouts meeting, it's happening and the parents have the link to attend. What we want to do also is that we want to make sure that these sessions, in terms of making them observable and interruptible, are happening in living spaces. So maybe it's the kitchen, maybe it's the living room, and at this time, actually, it's easier to insist on too deep leadership, because you can have an administrator sitting in their office doing their own work and still hop into a Zoom call at the same time. A parent can be cooking dinner, but still present. Another thing that people have done, and I want to note this because it's not a first line prevention measure, is to record all online sessions. And the reason I say it's not a primary prevention measure is because it's mostly retroactive. If there were a problem, then after the fact, you can go back and look at it. It still has some value, because if you make known to all of your staff that you are recording, and you spot check, and people know that supervisors will be coming in and reviewing those recordings, it has the potential to serve as a deterrent. I would say that we want to professionalize. And so that means nobody should be taking calls in pajamas, not the staff, and not or the adults, and not the children. We don't want to see calls happening where one party is lounging on their bed in their bedroom. And we have to understand that lots of people are crowded into small spaces, and so maybe they have to take the call in their bedroom, but then you sit on the floor with a white wall behind you, and again, you're not suggesting this intimacy, you're not texting a child past midnight. All of those same best practices and protocols, you're just applying them to the home setting.
I love this. This is so good. Okay, so Boz, I've got the next one for you, and I'm just trying to get my questions out. Sure, that was so great. Thank you. All right, so Boz, if faith leaders make a report of suspected abuse during the pandemic, how is the government responding, and would anything really be done? I get asked this question probably the most, never mind during the pandemic, but I get asked, who do I call? And am I going to be drawn into something? And what if I'm wrong? And are they going to do anything anyway?
Yeah, I find that question probably more often asked in faith communities than anywhere else. And that is, I think, sadly and unfortunately, this notion, at least in some faith communities, that this is immense distrust of government. So I'm not going to, why would I call them? They can't do anything right. So, and what if I'm wrong? And all these types of things, when that's really not the question you need to be asking. the question you'd be asking is, do I suspect abuse? And if I do, I would challenge faith leaders. Your very faith requires you to make that report. Don't make the decision for the government. Let those who are best trained and most educated and most experienced respond to that disclosure. But I want to say something else too that I was thinking through as Victor and Shira were speaking. And that is, I want to say something to the faith leaders who are watching us today. I think these are really challenging times. Obviously, faith leaders are challenged because they are having to do, worship services from home. The whole dynamic of churches and synagogues and other faith communities are completely changed. You see some faith communities who see their income going down. And I mean, there's just a lot of stress, in my opinion, on the backs of a lot of faith leaders. And here's what I want to encourage them is that it's a very stressful time for you, but it is that much more for those in your congregation. Every congregation, if you just take, just the basic statistics, if you had a congregation of 100 men and 100 women, you'd have about almost 21% of your congregation would be abuse survivors. So that's already a major.
Would you say that again? Because that went by fast, and I think that is so important.
So if you take the statistics, the generally acceptable statistics, and there's some varieties, but 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men have been sexually abused before they turn 18 in some capacity. If you take that, and I'm terrible with math, that's why I became a lawyer, but we just go, if you have 100 men and 100 women, that's 20.5% of your congregation are survivors.
Yeah.
So those same survivors are finding themselves at home right now, oftentimes struggling with the fact that they feel trapped, which is oftentimes the very same dynamics and trauma that they experienced when they were abused. They find themselves powerless, which oftentimes are the very same dynamics they experienced when they were abused. And they find that not only are they powerless, but they have very little control. They're being told by somebody else what to do. And many of them, as already have been stated, are in not very healthy homes even now. And I think it's really important for faith leaders to understand that they have survivors in their churches that are profoundly struggling right now, and most of them will never say a word about it. And so that means I think faith leaders have to become intentional and strategic about contacting, obviously, everybody in their congregation, but there needs to be an intentionality on reaching out to at least the known survivors, and then those who are unknown, for the pastor to be communicating things out to the congregation about how, we understand this is a struggle for everybody. We understand people who've experienced some type of trauma in their life are probably struggling even at a greater level, and to be a resource, either to connect those people with resources, or just have leadership in place to be a listening ear, but be intentional, because unlike church, you at least, sometimes you'll see the person at church, so at least they're there. But in this world in the virtual world, you can lose people.
Right.
You can lose people very easily, and oftentimes we lose the most vulnerable. And the other thing I would say, that's for survivors. For kids, one of the things I was thinking of when Victor was talking is, in the many Zoom calls that I've had, and all of us have had, I mean, the world now has become the world of Zoom and Microsoft Teams. But you can observe a lot during a conversation. And there have been some calls that I've had with people, and they're all been good, but kids are screaming, and I mean, it's just chaos in the household. And I think pastors and faith leaders need to have their antennas up about those things. Maybe not the fact that there's necessarily abuse going on in that house, but to know, wow, the temperature in that household is really high right now. And we need to be intentional about making sure those kids are protected, and what can we do to be a resource and a help for mom or dad. I just think those types of things for faith leaders, I think, can get overlooked quickly because of all the other stuff that they're doing. But in a time like this, actually, I would say this is the more important stuff to be focused on than a lot of the other things that they may be worried about and panicking about.
I agree with you totally. And as a survivor leader, a survivor myself, who've had many interactions, and a lot of them not very positive in faith-based organizations, what would you say to the different faiths where it is sort of against their protocol to have a man be considered of a survivor female. So there's the faith-based leaders, and maybe who's being triggered, the survivors in their organization. Of course, we know it's men and women, but I'm just speaking to the women right now. So there's a faith-based leader, there's a woman who's a survivor who might be maybe not silent, actually saying, hey, I'm struggling right now with something. And they're just like, you know, hands off, I don't want to deal with that. What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, usually the hands-off response is because they're uncomfortable and have no idea how to deal with it.
Exactly.
Now, in the worst case scenario, it's because they just have a lower view of the woman, and it's not as important. But let's give them credit here and just say that they just are unknown about this.
Right.
And because they're unknown, it's one thing to talk to somebody about their difficult marriage, because pastors do that all the time. They're even trained oftentimes in seminary about things like that. These are issues they're not trained about. And so that's one of the things that Grace and Sacred Spaces and even Zero Abuse Project offers faith communities. Our safeguarding initiative comes in and equips and educates everybody, starting with leadership, so that when they do receive those responses, first of all, you create a culture where a survivor actually feels safe and empowered to actually say something to their church leader. I can't tell you how many survivors I've met that would never even dream about telling their clergy about their trauma because they're scared to death and have no idea how that person will respond, or they've actually witnessed them respond to somebody else and they were like, no way am I ever going to say anything. So why not equip them in a way so we could help create a culture where survivors feel safe and empowered to say something, and that those who they say something to are equipped and have the right tools in their toolbox to know how best to respond. And how best to respond may be, hey, let me connect you with this woman in our church who's trained and equipped to speak with you. And it may not be, and oftentimes it should not be, the pastor going, well, let me counsel you through this. That's another
right. Alone.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of pastors, and I think we all fall into this, but they oftentimes struggle with where their boundaries are.
Right.
And to know and be humble enough to say, hey, listen, I know just enough to say that I don't have the right tools to help you in this, but I know somebody that does, and I'm going to connect you with that person, and I'm going to follow up to make sure that that's happening. I think if we can equip churches and faith communities in that way, you're going to have fewer and fewer clergy or leaders responding in the way that you mentioned in your question.
You know, I was very surprised to learn when Zero Abuse Project came and spoke with us. I was very surprised to learn that this education is not mandatory in seminary. I don't know what the Jewish term for seminary is. If it's the same thing, I apologize if it's not. It is?
Yeah.
That they're just not, you know, they're not being educated. So for the faith-based leaders who are listening, be it Jewish or Christian, would they call your organization? Would you guys come, Zero Abuse or Grace or Sacred Spaces, come and educate churches here? I mean, how does that work? How does your educational program work?
For us, they reach out to us. We connect them with our safeguarding director. He will walk them through what that process looks like. And again, it's a big difference. And I think all three organizations do this really well, is we don't just come in and do a bunch of things you can check off the boxes. Yeah. That doesn't create and transform cultures. We come in and we often spend anywhere from 6 to 9 months working with that faith community, because our hope and prayer is that through that work, the culture of that community actually begins to transform. And that's just not just leaders, it's everyone. The more we train and equip and give everybody the right tools in their toolbox, the safer that particular community is. So yeah, reach out, ask about the process, ask Zero Abuse. If you're in the Jewish community, reach out to Sacred Spaces, incredible organization, to say, how do we learn? Because the reality is, A, it's not taught in seminaries. And the other issue is that even in the Protestant world, there are so many non-denominational churches popping up where pastors have never even stepped into a seminary. So even if there was something being taught at a seminary, these people are not people who have graduated from a seminary, and we say it's not too late to learn.
Right. And it doesn't matter the denomination, right? You're not trying to recruit. This is all about the culture, survivors, educating the faith leaders and their congregations.
Yeah, we don't go in to try to change theology.
Yeah.
In fact, we recently had a conversation among our 3 organizations about a seminary curriculum that could be tailored towards each religion, but that would have the same core principles. So as you say, it's not, the core messaging is something that has to happen across the board. And in many ways, we see the same dynamics across faiths, and it's about working together to then apply and tailor to each faith.
I love that. I love that. And that's exactly what our intention here in Maine is to say, hey, this core information is regardless of whatever your particular faith is. This is just common sense how we need to treat, like he was saying, half of the people that are in the congregations and synagogues have been abused. This is a real thing, and we need to address it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the next question, Boz. This will be for you too. What are some things faith communities can do, and do you have resources, which is what we were just touching on?
Well, I mean, I think faith communities, the general response to that is first and foremost to acknowledge that this is a major issue, and it's not out there, it's in here. And I think that's a big issue that I think a lot of Protestant communities, especially more conservative Protestant communities, struggle with. We focus a lot about the issues out there. And I can't tell you how many cases and situations we've dealt with where a Protestant community is preaching loud about the stuff out there, while inside their own congregation, there's systemic abuse. And so to understand and acknowledge that there are no boundaries, that oftentimes faith communities are even more dangerous because of the dynamics involved that we don't have time to get into for young people. And then the other thing I would say, and again, this could be a whole conversation, is what are we doing as faith leaders to learn from survivors? I mean, literally and genuinely sitting at their feet and learning from them, not to placate them, to say, oh, we want to give you a voice and almost treat them like a patient, but to say, actually, so many of you have so much more knowledge than we do about this. And we want to listen, not to just make you happy or try to, make you feel valuable. That can be quite offensive and objectifying, but saying, no, you actually have something to offer us to help us create over time a much safer space. And a lot of survivors who would be interested in doing that would I think run towards that, because they would say, man, if my church where this happened to me had been properly educated, understood these dynamics, I wonder whether I would have ever even been abused. And even if I had been, the way the church would have responded would have been so much different. Because one thing we've learned through the work I do is that so many survivors will tell me, yes, the abuse was traumatic and it's something I'm going to process for the rest of my life. But what was actually more damaging to me as a human being was the failed response of the very community that I thought would become my greatest supporter and advocate. And that's, I think, a good start.
And as a survivor, I'm right there with you, and we could talk 2 hours just on that. The stories I could tell you. And you're right. As a survivor, if it's an advocacy, if it's a faith-based organization, it's like as a survivor, you're to be seen and not heard. We want to tell people that we accept this survivor. The survivor's here, pat them on the head. But there's no voice. There's no respect. So you're right. And I agree wholeheartedly.
I do want to say, I think this is the moment when our faith communities shine. We're really good at this, as Victor is saying. We make meal trains when somebody has a baby or is sick, right? And so we know how to handle this. And so I'm seeing so many examples of faith communities building resiliency, checking in on the vulnerable, and helping to protect those who need protection. And so I'll just offer a couple of quick examples. We're seeing some synagogues where they're making these Zoom groups where they've divided up every single member of their congregation into groups of 7 people that meet on a weekly basis to check in with each other to learn together and to form a sense of micro community. And in addition to that, we're seeing there's a Rabbi David Ingber. He hosted a Shabbat of the Child, and during that Shabbat of the Child, he sang so powerfully about a child being abused. And he created a group aliyah where normally one person might be called to the Torah, but instead many people had that privilege and that honor to stand up virtually or to stand up with survivors. So there's so many different ways. And what I'd like to say to faith leaders is we can all think of examples of times when faith leaders have not gotten this right. But there are so many other examples of times when a faith leader has been a lifeline to a child in need, to a family. And one thing, saying the right thing, offering training, offering that line one time can change a person's life. And the power that clergy hold to offer this to communities is transformative. So thank you for everything that you do. And you really can make the difference.
All right, so Victor, this one is for you. I want to talk about resilience. So let's talk about that, because everybody hears that word resilience, but I don't know in the faith-based community if they really get what that means.
Resilience reflects a growing body of research that documents a lot of survivors of abuse. They grow up pretty well. They don't have significant medical and mental health issues. So researchers are trying to focus on why is that? Why are some children resilient? And the good news for faith leaders is for a lot of survivors of abuse, if they are able to maintain a healthy sense of spirituality, it is a significant buffer against the trauma. So faith communities can help instill resilience in children. How do you do that? Well, a Bible story that reflects resilience, overcoming obstacles, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that God provides for us. You could talk about the story in the Hebrew Bible of God providing manna to the Israelites every day. And how does God provide for us today? How does God provide for us in the pandemic? Well, God is using grocers and truck drivers and delivery folks who will bring food to mom and dad, that there are social workers and others who care about us, and they are doing God's work. That is building a sense of resiliency. Music and art is building a sense of resiliency. Common sense sorts of things. And I would say that personal safety trainings and sermons talking about maltreatment and saying we're here and we care about you and we're on the side of survivors, that builds a sense of resiliency, creates in the child the idea that there are people I can turn to when and if I feel that I'm able to reach out to them. All those things build resiliency. Dr. Michelle Madsen Thompson is one of the nation's foremost experts on building resiliency in children. And she has been doing free every week during the pandemic, a simple little newsletter that parents could print out and read to their children. You can find that on multiple sources, but the Academy on Violence and Abuse under their COVID-19 section has each of those that come out each week. So pastors could share that with their parents, saying, hey, here's something you can print out and go through with your children that will help build resiliency, not just against the possibility of abuse, but just all the struggles children are having right now living in this quarantine. Simple things like that churches and synagogues and temples can do for their parishioners.
Thank you so much for that. So as we in the state of Maine, straight across the board are all of our faith-based organizations, as I reach out to them and I share this video with them, is there anything that we haven't said that you really would like to offer as a message to our state here in Maine, our faith-based organizations? Any of you?
I would just encourage them to know that they're not alone and that there are resources. And I think today is an example of just 3 that are available and know, I think by and large know what we're talking about. I think faith leaders need to understand that they don't have to be the experts, but there are experts out there that are ready and willing to assist them through what oftentimes seems to be almost an overwhelming topic. That would be one, for, at least from me.
Thank you.
I would add to that, that although the pandemic creates challenges, as Boz mentioned earlier, it also creates opportunities. You may have opportunities now to reach families that you didn't have before. So having an open dialogue about, hey, families are under great stress right now, and we're aware of that. We're here for you, and we may not know the answers, but we'll help connect you to those who do. And look for good, high quality resources. The World Health Organization has great resources for families and children in managing stress. Clergy could take a lead in getting that into the hands of their community. I mentioned Dr. Michelle Madsen's newsletter every week. Something like that you can be distributing freely. Now's the time to talk about these issues in a sermon, to create that environment. Hey, we're aware of this, it's on our radar, and that there are things that we could do. Modifying your child protection policies along the lines that Shira recommended is not just wise in keeping children safe, but it's also a witness to your faith. If there is a God, and I think all of us on the call are in the camp that there is, then surely God is watching us right now from a distance and wondering how we rise to this challenge. In every great crises, it's always the vulnerable who are impacted the most. In that case, in this crisis, it's the children. And so God is expecting us to rise to this moment in time and to care for the little ones that are entrusted to us.
So we're wrapping up, and I guess the last question I would ask, because they come up against this a lot, and so just quickly, do you feel that education is important in the area of prevention regarding child abuse? Would just quickly love your thoughts on that, mainly because I hear a lot that people hear, and people that should know better, they don't think that education is effective in the world of prevention. So having the three of you speak to that just before we end would mean a lot.
I mean, there is some research on personal safety. Education certainly grows the knowledge of youth and can build a sense of resiliency and increases the chance they may make an outcry. But I would just say more broadly on education, nothing changes without education. Most folks in the faith community are well-meaning. They do genuinely care, but without education, they're poorly equipped to recognize or respond to any form of violence. So the Centers for Disease Control says educate the youth, educate the faith leaders, and educate the broader community. And Sacred Spaces, Grace, Zero Abuse Project, we all have resources to help in that regard.
Wonderful. Well, you guys, I want to be respectful of your time, and our time is up. Thank you so much for your generosity, sharing your heart, sharing your knowledge and experience with me and all the people that will be privileged to watch this Zoom call. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you. I'll put all of your contact information and the resources that were mentioned in the bed of this that goes out. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, so much. Appreciate what you're doing for so many.